Hello, I'm Joshua Farnsworth and welcome to my traditional woodworking school here in Earlysville, Virginia. In this video, we're continuing Bill Anderson's molding plane introduction on how to choose molding planes. In this particular video, Bill's going to talk about choosing dedicated molding planes and beading planes. So if you missed the last video, you can go ahead and watch that where he introduces generally all the molding planes. I hope you enjoy this video.
I wanted to talk about four groups of planes that we can make moldings with, four groups of tools. We have dedicated molding planes, like these right here. We have hollows and rounds, exemplified by this set here. We have what I call cleanup planes here. And then we have what you might call miscellaneous tools, which are other tools like scratch stock, hand routers, hand beaters. They're useful for cutting small moldings. So when we look at all these planes here, the first one we'll talk about are dedicated molding planes. These are planes that are meant to cut a single profile, the single size of a profile, dedicated to that particular use. And right here in my hand, I have an OG plane that cuts this very sublime profile, a double curve with a fillet called the OG. This is actually a Cyma reversa, is the correct Latin name. One of the things to look at these planes here have spring, they have a spring line, and among the dedicated molding planes, I would also include planes that don't have spring, and we'll talk about those in a second. The spring line is something that the maker of the plane has scribed onto the nose of the plane here to indicate to the user what angle to hold the plane at to cut the appropriate profile. Now you can see that when I cut this profile here, the stock is held vertical, for example, and the plane is held at an angle. That's the spring. It's important to keep the plane at that angle as you use it at all times throughout the cut. Otherwise, you wind up with a different profile. Here's something that's specific about dedicated molding planes. It's very important. They all have a depth stop and they have a fence. The fence in this case is very, very small. The fence is the part of the plane that rests up against the side of the stock like so. It stops the plane from moving this way. So there's the fence like that. The depth stop, the plane continues to cut down until the depth stop hits the top of the stock and then it stops cutting there. So when the fence and the depth stop both strike the stock, plane quits cutting. You'll notice that the fence is non-cutting. There's no iron there. And over here, same way with the depth stop, no iron. So that's built-in fence and depth stop. And these vary in width from plane to plane, an important characteristic. One thing that you sometimes see on dedicated molding planes is that they've gotten a lot of use, and sharp corners like this right here may be rounded over from use for the last 100, 150 years. Things like that can be straightened up with appropriate planes, scratch stock, shoulder planes, so on and so forth. We're going to talk about that in detail. But right now I'm going to look at what I consider the three bread and butter profiles to have. Profiles you see everywhere. The OG. Another one would be the cove, also known as the covetto. And again, you can see there's a spring line, there's a fence and a depth stop. The same issues apply here as apply with the other plane. You hold it at the right angle. There isn't a sharp edge on this particular plane. It's a continuous curve, and if there's any damage to this curve, it can be easily cleaned up with a small shoulder plane or a scraper. So, and these two shoulders here can be straightened up with a shoulder plane. So those are pretty straightforward. So cove, third dedicated molding plane is known as an ovalo. Ovalo is just a Greek word for a outside curve. This is a square ovalo, also known as a quarter round. Again, spring line, fence, depth stop, two sharp corners right there. It can be rounded over, so that's sometimes an issue. Sometimes these can be so rounded over, it almost makes the profile look like that of an OG. Again, pretty straightforward. These three moldings you see everywhere. In terms of the size of planes that I might be looking for, if I was going to buy 3 of these planes, for example, you want to look for planes that cut on the size of stock, thickness of stock that you normally work with. 3/4 of an inch, for example, would be quite common. So you want a profile that's marked. Often the profile of the plane is marked on the heel of the plane. This one has the number 1/2 stamped in here, which means that it will cut a profile on stock 1/2 inch thick. And when it does so, it leaves enough material at the bottom of the profile to work just right on 3/4 inch thick stock. For example, if you're cutting the profile this way, would this work? Yes. It would leave a small fillet right down here and you'd be in business. So, 3 dedicated molding planes, all with spring. Here's a plane, a beading plane, that cuts a half round profile on the edge of stock. And these planes are used without spring. They're meant to be used straight up and down. They have to be because they cut a half circle. You can't cut a half circle any other way except straight up and down like that. When the plane cuts this half circle, the very first thing that happens, and you can see that, is that this little part right here, this sharp part, cuts a groove down the middle. So it's not the outside edge, it's not the fence side that cuts the profile in the very beginning, it's this quirk right here. It makes a little groove. Once the plane drops into that groove, you're not getting out of it. So a light pass in the beginning to start the cut, and once that pass, once you got that quirk started, then you can bear down and follow through and cut the rest of the curved profile. One of the things you'll often see with beading planes is that this portion of the boxing, and you can see the plane is boxed. It's got an insert of very hard, dense wood, boxwood, to preserve this edge right here, that part of the profile. This one actually is a fully boxed plane. The boxing includes the whole profile. Sometimes that boxing is worn down here because as the individual uses the plane and they push through, they bear down on the nose end most, and they wear down that part, or as they're going through and finishing out the cut down that quirk and they pull over, they break away the front part of the boxing by not following through straight through. They come off to a side. So this is often worn down. And when you look down the length of the plane like this, you can see that the boxing may be at 2 different heights. The iron needs to clear the boxing at the highest boxing here, but if this part is very low, the iron is way exposed here and it may be cutting too heavy to give you an adequate cut in the beginning. So that needs to be worked down a little bit, and so that boxing is the same height. We'll talk about that in great detail. As far as sizes of beading planes, the most common sizes, useful sizes, are 3/16, 4/16, or 5/16. And those measurements refer to the width of the profile of the bead. You can see here, this bead from the outside of the quirk to the edge of the stock, that width is the width of the plane. So one of those sizes would be a very useful size, one of those 3 sizes. Larger than that, you're starting to talk about architectural type beadings. So beyond that, those are what I would consider the bread and butter grouping of dedicated molding planes. So if you're looking to start off with a good set of dedicated molding planes, I would start off with an OG, a small OG, a cavetto or cove plane, and an ovalo or quarter round, and a beading plane.
If you're interested in learning traditional woodworking, come take a class at our school in Earlysville, Virginia. You can also visit our website at WoodAndShop.com, where you'll find a bunch of free woodworking lessons, workshop tours, and our very popular tool buying guides. And make sure you subscribe to our free newsletter to get our latest articles and videos. Enjoy!